Brown says, get that India. Big boy.
Call an ambulance! Maybe call a priest! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell killer!
Hello and welcome back to another massive edition of the Tip Sheet podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, also known as 4020. Joining me to break down a rather rambunctious week of news for the Parramatta Eels. Just a minor breaking story happening for the Blue and Gold this week that we'll get to shortly. My good mates, Sixties and Quint, fellas. It's a lot nicer to log on and record the podcast after a big surprise win. I don't know about you guys, but I did not have us pegged as winners over the Cowboys heading into that one. And, lo and behold, they dug very deep to get over the line and stun one of the form teams of the competition. 60s, how are you holding up after all of that?
Well, I'm always holding up much better after a win than after a loss. The interesting thing is, when we're talking about site visits, we really spiked with site visits when Parramatta was losing. And then what was actually pleasing was that the spike continued after the win this week. So I was thinking Eels fans love doom and gloom, but I guess as equally Eels fans love a bounce back to a win. So that was interesting this week. Clint, what about you? How are you travelling?
Much like your two good selves, a very, very happy supporter this week. Great performance, and we'll probably give our final thoughts on it very shortly. But not too dissimilar to John. I went into the game hoping for the best, but expecting the worst. Came out pleasantly surprised. We roll into some even better news today. Let's hope we can keep this momentum going all the way up to Darwin and back to Parramatta again.
Oh, and fellas, I should mention that I had a content producer from Entertain House sent me their vlog of last week's game. And both of you fellas would be pleased to know that your faces were prominent in the vlog where the bloke gives his reaction to the game as it's happening. So he has the camera turned on himself and his reaction, and he's talking about what's happening in the game as it's happening. And Clint, you're there looking quite studious. And John, your head isn't in shot all the time, but it manages to, because I think you were sitting next to him.
Yeah.
So every now and again, your head sort of comes into the screenshot as almost like a guest appearance from time to time.
I pity the audience. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so that was interesting to have a look at, and it was one of those times where at least it captured some joy on the faces at various times during the game. So now, just as we normally do, fellas, and we thank our sponsors, and particularly to Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta, who have been with us from the start, and also a mention this week for Paraleagues, because we will be doing an away game. Well, it's not an away game. It's the Eels game in Darwin. It's actually a home game, but it's being played in Darwin on Friday night. And as a consequence, because it's a home game, we're also making an appearance in Parramatta Leagues Club, a little bit pre-game with a bit of a preview, maybe a few halftime comments, and then we'll be there for the post-game podcast. So keep an eye out as we update exactly where we will be. I'm thinking we'll probably be in Sturlo's for the big screen there. I can't say 100% for sure. We just got to double check with the club where they'd like us to be located this week. But look, please come in, have a drink with us, have a bit of a chat about the footy. There's going to be plenty of opportunities to meet people and catch up with all of you. So I'm hoping to see plenty of you down there to create a bit of atmosphere watching the game together down at Parramatta Leagues Club this week. After all, it is the home of the Eels, and this is a home game. So look forward to seeing you there. But we do have to announce this week that Big Swing Golf won't be with us for 2024. So we thank them for their sponsorship during 2023. It all helps to make what we do possible. So thank you, as I said, to Big Swing Golf at Northmead. Of course, that does mean that there are sponsorship opportunities, not just one, but we've probably got multiple sponsorship opportunities to get involved with the Cumberland Throw. So if there's any businesses out there that would like to be associated with Parramatta Eels supporter website that covers everything from the juniors all the way through to the NRL and NRLW, then we'd love to hear from you. John, anything you'd like to add at this point before we launch into the Eels news?
No, I think you've done a fantastic job covering it, the Leagues Club appearance, the sponsor thanks and opportunities. So on that note, let's get right into it.
News team, assemble!
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
And with that, the Eels have formally announced the signing of Zach Lomax starting from 2025. John, I'm going to throw to you for some of those details.
Yeah, so I wouldn't even call it the worst kept secret in rugby league. It's been anything but a secret, hasn't it? The Parramatta Eels have been very forthright in their pursuit of a star back. They approach the Dragons through the front door, making sure to do everything above board, and it's been a long time coming. So big details, 4-year deal, which would have been an extension on his existing deal with the Dragons. Worth mentioning that Zach is turning, I think, 25 this year. So he's very much still just entering the prime of his career. The media talked about it as a 4-year, $2.8 million deal, which puts it at $650,000 per season, which is a lot more palatable than the $800,000 or in excess of $800,000 that he was contracted to as a Dragon. He has been arguably the form player of the competition, if not the form winger of the competition. His best football is ahead of him. He can do things that no one else in our backline can do, including Will Penasini. Zach's ability to win the high ball is almost unparalleled in the competition, except for maybe Xavier Coates. So got a real difference maker there. Can play wing, can play centre, can play fullback. I know that there's been talk about him not wanting to play wing, but it leaves the Eels with a very intriguing piece for next year. The question is, boys, is it only for next year?
Well, for a start, Clint, I'm interested in what your initial reaction is before you launch into John's question that he's posed back to us. Is this, for a start, are you happy with the amount that he's being paid? And secondly, do you rate his signing as important as it seems like most of us are? I think without question, there have been games, the games that the Dragons have won this year, I would argue they wouldn't have won without him on the field.
And those are fair comments to make. And look, we've been speculating about the possibility of signing someone like Zach Lomax. You know, we think back as recently as following the departure of Anthony Griffin as head coach of the St. George Illawarra Dragons last year. We wanted to pounce on someone like Zach Lomax because, yeah, I do believe that this is a really, really good signing for the amount of which we've got him for. But the period, it seems like a good deal for both parties. You know, we could have been paying what the Dragons were paying. I agree that would have been too much. I think 650 is the real good midpoint for value for the player, value for the club. Someone who brings a multitude of, I guess, a lot of utility value, but I think will probably be best suited and most likely lining up at centre for us.
And to clarify, I think I said 2.8 mil over 4 years. It's 2.6, which was what 4x650 would be. So, look, once upon a time, you probably cringe a bit paying that much for an outside back. The cap has gone up. The value of outside backs is rising, and their ability to.
It's the new 500K.
That's pretty much is where I was going. Is that it is pretty much the new 500K, which was and always has been an acceptable benchmark for an elite player in your backline. So, it's hard to spin this as anything but positive. I know we've been very vocal and very critical of how the Eels have approached their recruitment in the back line. And in that vein, while I am going to give a 3 thumbs up for getting Lomax deal done at a great rate for a good distance, a good duration, like there is nothing to complain about there. I don't think the Eels can rest in their laurels now. They need to continue to be aggressive. Doesn't mean they need to go out and get another star, but you got to go find better depth, better competition moving forwards for our backline, not just in the NRL but in reserve grade. But yeah, for the Lomax signing, again, well done to Mark O'Neill, well done to the entire recruitment retention committee. Fantastic job. The only thing now to turn it from a A+ to an A triple+ signing would be to find a way to get him here this season.
Yeah, and that was where I wanted to take up the question that you asked. Is it going to be possible? I guess the ball is entirely in the Dragons' court there, and that's the obvious answer. We know what Parramatta would want. We know that they've got the cap space to do it. We know that they have to fill about 3 spots in the roster this year, which I don't know whether there's anything official that's come out, but it certainly looked like Hickey Ogden has done a peck, and that could just about be season ending. So you'd be talking about the roster being down to something like 26 right now, which doesn't leave much wriggle room if you've got injuries or suspension. So as you said, we can't rest on the laurels. I mean, we can't rest on the laurels. Never mind next year. We can't rest on the laurels right now.
No, because you are now relying on your team staying healthy, completely healthy from here on out, in a game where we just saw Bowie Simonson have a heart and mouth moment on a hip drop tackle that wasn't a hip drop tackle that could have rubbed him out for the rest of the season. And thankfully he seems to be okay. So that's how tenuous our grip on our roster stability is right now. The way the club worded their press release is very interesting. They signed off with, out of respect for Zach's current club, we will not be providing further comment until he joins the Eels or Parramatta Eels in 2025. That certainly doesn't close the door on us trying to pursue an early release. And I'm not going to say that we're going to be out here agitating and needling the Dragons for it, given the way we've conducted ourselves relatively straightforward, I feel, at least based on what we've seen in the media. But there's no reason for us not to be pressing and going to the Dragons. All right, what would it take? Where can we have some room for negotiations? You guys get the spot. You have to be able to go to the market. They're signing Manu Brown right now, so their top 30 is now, I think, filled out. If they need the spot, well, here's a guy they can get released. They can release right away. So there's a lot of different ways that we can approach this. I choose to be. Well, the word here I'll say is pragmatic, or and understanding that it probably isn't going to happen. Not getting my hopes up for it, but I do think the club are going to go hammer and tongs at this, because you get Zach Lomax in this Eels team, and he's not going to transform the team single-handedly, but geez, he's going to make a difference.
Yeah, look, I think unquestionably it is a big difference for the Eels. He'd be a big difference maker. I totally agree with the Eels' stance on this, because we've seen it before when clubs have put out photos of what the player would look like in their gear, or they've taken photos that were supposed to be just for in-club but ended up being leaked, all that sort of stuff going on. You don't want to create bad blood with another club when it comes to acquiring players and working out deals, because people might not be aware of this, but there is always negotiations going on between clubs. And if clubs have respect for each other, it's possible to work out these sorts of deals that are mutually beneficial for each party. You don't want to burn bridges with another organisation, and I'm hoping that it stays that way, and that there are talks going on right now between the two clubs. I'm sure that is the case. I can't see that there wouldn't be any way that the Eels wouldn't be talking behind closed doors. And we know that the Eels are pretty good at keeping talks and negotiations in-house. Like there's very little that leaks. And when we talk about the news being well known about Zach Lomax, it was out there, not from the Eels perspective, but once it was out there, that was when we finally started hearing about him going and having dinner at Brad Arthur's place and all the sorts of stuff that goes on. Normally, when nothing has come out at all, and I'm talking about the media getting hold of something, and I guess it was well documented that Lomax had asked for the release from the Dragons, that that it was fairly well known that his target club was the Eels, so there wasn't too much to keep quiet about. But normally, all these sorts of things, meeting with BA or coming in and meeting at the club, none of that gets out there in the media. It was a little bit different this time around because of circumstances. I prefer it to be that way. I don't want to know who they're talking to. I don't know about you fellas, but if I find out who they're talking to, I would have ended up with nothing but disappointment in recent years. And not to say that I haven't been disappointed that they haven't recruited, an X Factor player up until now, or been able to add to the backline stocks. But you know what I mean? If you knew everyone they were talking to, it'd probably do your head in, wouldn't it? I mean, I know people want to know, but I don't want to do my head in. As far as I'm concerned, me knowing or anyone knowing isn't going to influence whether the thing happens or not. So, tell me when it's happened. Don't tell me beforehand. That's my attitude. And just finally on Lomax, fellas, earlier today I put out a poll on TCT Twitter about which position the supporters think would be best for Zach Lomax at the Eels in 2025 onwards, whether it be wing, centre or fullback. So you can vote there. It's obviously not going to impact what call Brad Arthur makes, but it'd be just interesting to see where the majority of supporters who respond to this poll see Zach Lomax as best suited to play in the Eels backline next year. So get on that. If you don't have Twitter and can't vote on it there, just respond to our podcast post. Just jump into the replies and let us know what position you'd like to see him playing in 2025 for the Eels. Okay, moving on, fellas. What's your final takes about that? Well, we're going to call it a surprise win over the Cowboys because not too many people were tipping it. 40 and I had our usual discussion in the preview about tipping with the head versus tipping with the heart. But, John, what's your final takes on the win over the Cowboys last Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't even a game of two halves. I think it was a game of one quarter and then three other quarters. Eels were absolutely dreadful in the opening 25 to 27 minutes and then somehow found a way to parlay that into a lead at halftime, which was outrageous. And again, I don't know if that speaks to the Cowboys failing to execute in opportunities or the Eels, digging really deep and sort of getting in their own way, but still finding a way to get it done. So maybe it was a combination of both. The second half was completely different. I thought that we were by far the better team. We controlled the middle. I know the Cowboys had a little surge on the back of some hot potato football. They're the sort of team that can do that. It just happens. But I was very pleased with the second half. I thought the effort was outstanding. We battled through another backline injury. I know that Bailey made a return in that game. The bionic eel with the $6 million repair out the back. But yeah, really, really happy to bank that win. I did not have that one chalked up as a W for our season. And I think it's going to prove to be, if we are to go on and make a run and get back into legitimate finals contention, I think this game, this round 6 victory, might be looked back on as a critical turning point while we've been without Mitchell Moses.
Clint, different circumstances and a different lineup for the Eels, but were there any circumstances about the game and how it played out that might have been similar in some way to the Manly game? Because we looked pretty ordinary at the start of the Manly game, and I was thinking they're going to put 40 on us here. And somehow we kept dragging ourselves into the game and then really controlled the second half. I think much like that game against the Cowboys.
It's a good comparison that you make there, Sixties, and it's not one that I've that I'd thought, but there are definitely some parallels that you can draw there, and you have drawn there. Look, the thing that we've really liked, bar the Raiders' performance, is that we've been in every game that we played this year, and that's what made the Raiders game so bitterly disappointing. Because even though we've been far from our best to start the year, we've given ourselves a hope of pulling the results, and it was really pleasing to see, much like the Manly game, that we were able to, despite having to overcome some adversity, and we rode our luck a little bit in that first half. Let's be honest, there was. And some of that's because we made our own luck. It was a great second effort from Sean Russell to force Murray Tuilagi into touch. And I will claim that I was the only one that caught that in real time.
I'll back that up because you were calling that he was out, and I said I don't think he was anywhere near out, Clint. And you were proven correct. We were debating, sitting there watching and waiting for the replay. And I'd gone the pessimistic path. I didn't think. I know we were a long way from the action in that it was the opposite corner side of the field we're on. But yeah, you called it straight away.
I trusted what I saw in the first take there, and I like to, without giving myself too much of a pat on the back, I do like to pride myself on being balanced, and I'll criticize us when we deserve to be criticized, or when I think a decision has happened favorably or for us, or gone to, should go the other way. And I knew watching that he just clipped it just before he got the ball down. So, that was an excellent effort from Sean Russell to do that. Morgan Harper, after a shaky start, recovered to have a solid game, which we needed him to, because the Cowboys in that first half looked like they were just creating space the same way that Manly were creating space in the first half a number of weeks back now. So, but man, was that second half so pleasing. We really asserted ourselves. And the great thing about that type of second half is that now, without Mitch Moses, we've given ourselves the confidence of a launch pad performance, and I'm hoping that that's something that they can carry into this game on the weekend, and subsequently the return game we've got against Manly heading into the bye.
Well, I think that wraps up our final takes on the Cowboys win, seeing as though we're at Tuesday, and of course Tuesday means team list. So, John, can you talk us through what's happening across 3 grades of Eels selections this week?
Yes, sir. And as always, we start at the top with the NRL team list. After a good win against the Cowboys, we weren't expecting too many changes, but Brad Arthur did reveal one on NRL 360 on Tuesday night. Very forward of him, actually, surprisingly so. But he told the panel there that the young gun Blaize Talagi would be coming back into the team, but not as a starter. He's going to be playing as the bench utility up in Darwin this week. And I think BA sort of circled around the idea of his flexibility across the back line, whether it's from fullback centres or the halves, and also sort of a cheeky little idea about maybe utilising the way that Queensland love to utilise their half utilities on the bench as an up-tempo lock to get real, crazy around the ruck. So I have to wait and see if that's going to come to fruition, but certainly something to think about. But it means the team looks like this: Gufferson at fullback, Simonson and Russell on the wings, Penasini and Harper in the centres, Dejan Arce kicked the field goal to ice the game. He's back at 6, Dylan Brown at 7, Reagan Campbell-Gillard and Junior Barlow named to start, although again we sort of expect Junior to default back to the bench. Joey Lussick is a dummy half, Lane, Cartwright and Hopgood in the back row. On the interchange, it's Moretti, Madison, Opengahi and the aforementioned Talagi. The player to make way obviously is Kelmer this week. He drops back to reserve grade, but he is part of the extended roster. Hands, Tuilagi, Greg Makatoa and Sivo. Referees, Todd Smith. He gets the reprieve this week. I actually like Todd Smith, and I hope I don't put the mockers on him to kill the Parramatta Eels, but in general...
I have memories of the last time we were waxing lyrical about Todd Smith.
Yeah, I think in general he calls a pretty clean game, but last time we did that, we did say that he ended up canning us, I think. So we're gonna be modest in our praise. And on the flip side, boys, for the Dolphins, it's a question of who they have to actually play. They're missing an absolute litany of stars and starters. I think it's where's my team list post? It actually was almost upsetting to type. We have no Thomas Flegg, no Hamiso Tapuai-Fidow, no Herbie Farnworth, no Felice Kafusi, no Tom Gilbert. The suspension of Milford happened this week too, so he's out too. No Connolly Lemalu as well, who's not as big a name as the others, but another top 17 player there. They are absolutely crushed in the injury reserve or injury regard this week. And like I was saying to you boys,
so what we're saying, John, it's ripe for an ambush. That's what that
certainly.
sounds like.
And look,
I'm going to say that now so we can get it out of the system to put it out there to the universe, and hopefully it has the opposite effect.
That is the same vibe as what I was going to say, in that you don't win games on Teamless Tuesday. You know, you can have the better team on paper. In this case, the Eels, even without the players that we have are unavailable or banged up in the team right now. They obviously are in a much better position than the Dolphins. But if you won games on paper, the premiership will be decided before round one starts. And in this case, we're taking on one of the best in the business in Wayne Bennett. You know that he's going to have these guys, up for the fight, to be tough, to be gritty, to dig deep. And if you play dumb football, the Dolphins will punish you for it. So, interesting to see what Brad Arthur's done there with Blaize Talagi, boys. And beyond that, not a surprise to see him sticking with the same starting team, and indeed 16 of the same 17 players that won against the Cowboys.
The interesting thing I think about the selection of Blaize on the bench is the week that he was selected in the halves, we suggested that was a flashback to his time in the Harold Matts team. And this is perhaps a flashback to his first year in the Harold Matts team, where he was often coming off the bench and playing a utility role. And I recall seeing him coming on, being used in the halves. I'm sure I remember him ducking into dummy half, playing a lock role as well. So he's probably got that type of utility value. And I think given the injury scare to Bailey Simonson, it's probably a good call from BA to have a back on the reserve list this week. Or on the interchange, I should say. So, John, what about the New South Wales Cup? How has all of those selection decisions impacted what's happening in New South Wales Cup?
Yeah, well, Cup are backing up after their breakthrough win of the season against the North Sydney Bears. They're looking to take it to 2 in a row now against the Roosters. And obviously, like you said, Sixties, they've got some changes based on the injury to Ofaki Ogden and the selection of Blaize Talagi into the NRL. We've put Zach Senior at fullback this week, and you can make an argument that Zach is third, fourth, fifth string fullback depending on who's available in the grey, but that's all they've got right now. He plays in the custodial role. Mike Acevo on the left wing, Isaac Lumilumi record the play right, Sam Loiziu and Jake Tonga are in the centres. In the halves, it's Brendan Hands and Ethan Sanders. Makasi Makatoa and Witter McGregor the bookends. Matt Arthur continues to start, and he is dominating on a weekly basis. It's been fantastic to see. In the halves and the edges, you got Dan Keir on the right, Kelma Tulangi on the left, or at least that's how I presume they're going to run out, given how they've played in the past with Dan Keir. That bumps Charlie Geimer, who's been quite good, honestly, on that left edge. He's going to play lock forward this week. On the interchange, Manny Luke, Matt Dury, who makes his return from a facial fracture sustained in round 3?
Yeah, round
2
against the
Panthers. So good to see Matt back there as they ease him back towards full match fitness. Brock Parker and Reece Alderton round out the interchange. And they're taking on another team, the Roosters, who also have just the one win on the season. So a chance for the Eels to actually build this week out at Wentworth Park on Sunday.
Yeah, we didn't think that we were going to see a win last week. I think, what was the score? 28-14 at one stage during the second half. And actually 28-14. And there was still a lot of time to go. So I remember we were having a discussion along the lines of there's plenty of time for the Eels to come back, but likewise, plenty of time for the score to nudge into the 40s quite easily. That was how it looked like it was unfolding early in the second half. But I guess it was a case of the Eels being able to find passages of their best during that second half. You mentioned the form of Woods Arthur. He is certainly a star of the future. He's a star of the New South Wales Cup right now, the way that he plays. You can see he's just thinking several steps ahead of his opponents. They'll no doubt be targeting him on a weekly basis, whoever he plays against. But anyone that hasn't seen him or doesn't rate him, I don't know what game they're looking at. They're certainly not seeing his performances this year. On paper, we've got some good forwards that are there, but we just have patches in games, don't we, where it doesn't come together for them. So we'll soon see how they go this week, and we'll talk a bit more in depth about it on our preview podcast. Clint, anything you want to add about the New South Wales Cup selections?
Well, it's great to see Matt Dory back. It'd be even better if he can get some run of game time, because I think he's certainly got something to offer our NRL squad and our back row stock. He had some good cameo performances off the bench last year and ran some really good lines. So, really good to see him back in the squad. But yeah, a good chance this weekend to, as you said, their 60s consolidate their form, and hopefully they've turned a little bit of a corner as well, because sometimes you just need that first win when you've been winless, and it can make all the difference.
And a quick question for both of you, and I'm really jumping ahead here, but just in relation to Charlie Geimer, what likelihood do you think there is that later in the season he might get a small taste of NRL?
I don't think it's outside the bounds of possibility. He's been really solid. Hasn't been a star, but it's his first year of senior football. He's eligible for Jersey Flegg. He's not eligible for ball, is he?
Not anymore, no.
No, so his first year Flegg or junior year Flegg eligibility. He has been a pro up there. He's a very smart player. Puts himself in I spoke about it for other players in the past, but puts himself in a position to succeed. He's on the ball. He's in support. Defensively, he knows his assignments quite well for a young player. There are all these factors that come together to make him just a really well-rounded player. He's not a dynamic athlete compared to, the elite bodies in the back row that you see sometimes, like a Hamola or Kawata or something like that. But he's physical, he's tough, got good hands. His history as a centre and a half served him well in that regard. So I really like Charlie as a prospect, and I don't think it's, like I said, don't think it's outside the bounds of possibility that down the road this year he might get a small role, other than what we saw with Luca Moretti, who now has carved out a bigger piece of playing time in the NRL, and he could be this year's Luca Moretti.
Okay, that's interesting. Clint, where do you see it?
I think John's hit the nail on the head, and that's exactly how it'll unfold. It'd also be a good reward for another player coming through our systems. Obviously, he's got to earn it, but you would assume, based on his current trajectory and how he's for a team that up until this weekend pass was winless, Charlie's been a very strong performer at cup level, and it's not easy. It's not easy for a kid coming into the forwards to do that. But that being said, he continues on this current trajectory. I totally expect him to have a handful of games with some cameos off the bench towards the end of the year.
In saying all that, I would have kept him on the edge this week over Dan Keir.
Agreed.
But that's how they've chosen to go. And maybe this is an important showcase of versatility for him. They've experimented with it at lock forward last year in the Jersey Flegg, and he was pretty solid. But maybe if he shows his ability to play lock and edge in the senior system, that'll put him in good stead to progress further.
Yeah, and that's a fair call. Now, just as you're about to give us the Jersey Flegg team list, I'm assuming that Jock Brazel must be injured, given that he doesn't appear on the team list in either New South Wales Cup or Jersey Flegg. So, mate, can you take us through the Jersey Flegg team list?
Absolute flurry of changes for the Eels and the Flegg. The one team left chasing a breakthrough win, and ironically, they were the team closest out of the Cup and the Flegg in recent weeks, but couldn't quite get it done. Went down to the Melbourne Storm, I think 24-12 on the weekend. The loss of the SG Ball in the finals to the Bulldogs is their gain. It facilitates a massive overhaul of the back line. We have a new face, though, externally, in Tyler Cuthbert at fullback, who's a new recruit from Queensland. Eels obviously loving their Sunshine State recruits in recent seasons. On the wings, you got Muhammad Al-Madeen, Devonta Vivella, both SG Ball players. Likewise, Dakota Kakoi is in the centres. He's another SG Ball prospect. That leaves Dom Destratus as the lone returning member of recent weeks' backlines. And we know that Dom, you talk about with Charlie, guys that put themselves in positions to succeed on the field. Dom was cut from that same cloth. The whole backline change means that Arpa Tweedle is no longer playing fullback. He's in the halves, partnering Joshua Lynn, who was back from a one-game suspension. In the front row, Sam Tuivasa and Lachlan Mears-Crabbe will be the props. Riley Smith, likewise, with Arpa getting bumped into the halves, he now returns to his preferred position at dummy half, so that helps the team getting Riley back into his number one role. On the edges, it's Will Lewis and Michael Abdo. Saxon Pryke is a lock forward. Interchange is Yaya Ayachi, Max Tupou, Lanceville Lima, and Tinkin Brown. Zachary Hunter, the 18th man or reserve. And they're taking on the Sydney Roosters as the curtain raiser to that New South Wales Cup game. So if you have the opportunity, you get out to Wentworth Park at the next to the Greyhound track, I think it is. You got a chance to watch a couple of Parramatta games on Sunday.
Sounds like the plan for people that are craving a bit of live Eels football, mate. Look, it'd be good to see them get a win this week. They went into last week's game without their halfback in Josh Lynn, and they were leading 12-6 for a period of time there. They were bumped to Crestwood Oval as well. They were moved from Cabramatta from memory. I think that was the original scheduled venue, but they ended up out at Crestwood Oval at Borkham Hills. So let's hope that they can get their first win this week. It'd be interesting to see the impact that those team changes have made there. Now, just before we head into your musical interlude, mate, and then the new NRL news, we do have lower grade and junior rep results. We've mentioned there that the Eels had a victory in the New South Wales Cup, 30-28, wasn't it, John?
30-28, yeah, 6
final
tries to 5.
Yeah,
So,
and 24-12 in the Jersey Flegg.
correct.
We've talked about, we've probably covered them, I think, as well as we possibly can. But, John, not good news in the junior reps this past weekend.
3 teams vying for berths in their respective grand final qualifiers across the Lisa Fiola, Harold Matthews and SG Ball. And unfortunately, none of them progressed across the Saturday and Sunday at Leichhardt Oval. Coming off that prolonged preparation period due to the wet round that was then wet rounded, the Eels came out a little bit underprepared and perhaps overmatched across the 3-team 60s. Knights accounting for our Fiola team 22-10. Warriors racing out the blocks in the first half to secure, I think it was a 24-0 lead before ultimately prevailing 30-20. The Eels made a couple of comeback attempts in that game, but couldn't quite seize control of the momentum enough. And the final result was a 42-10 victory for the Bulldogs in the SG Ball. The Dogs were very much fired up for this game. The Eels just couldn't match them blow for blow. So despite fielding some pretty good teams across the park there, I think the Fiola and the Matthews squads were very talented. And the Ball squad showed plenty of grit and resilience throughout the season. None of them get through to the grand final qualifiers. And obviously the loss in the SG Ball helps the Jersey Flegg, as we just mentioned. But it cuts the season short by a couple of games than perhaps they were hoping.
And just my final takes on those 3 games. I thought the Lisa Fiola team I actually thought that they were probably they dominated large periods of that game against Newcastle, and just a couple of errors at crucial times were very, very costly for them. It could have easily been a scoreline that was reversed, in my opinion, that is. And when it came to the Harold Matts, the Eels just weren't ready for that early onslaught from the Warriors, and I think never recovered from. Certainly they didn't recover in the first half, from the power play of the Warriors, who just went full tilt at them. Whether the Warriors can reproduce that next week remains to be seen. But we were very cautious ourselves about what the Warriors might have to offer after seeing them in round one. And though the Eels dispatched them by a big scoreline in round one, in terms of what we witnessed from the play of the Warriors, it was just that they needed a little bit of polish, and with a little bit of polish, which you'd expect they would have got from playing together for the season, and I think they had a halfback introduced to the team partway through the season, they were a formidable opponent. And look, full marks to the Eels, because we had an undefeated season and were unlucky not to finish in the top two. And if we had finished in the top two, they wouldn't have been playing last week. It would have been straight through to the grand final qualifiers this week. And the quirk of the draw, of course, was that the Bulldogs and the West Magpies, who finished 1 and 2, we had to play both of them, drew both of them during the year, and the Bulldogs and the Magpies never had to play each other. So by virtue of two draws, we finished third and not first or second.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, then we bow out. I mean, mind you, if you're not good enough to beat the team that finished sixth, then I guess that's how you end up being judged. But it was pretty tough that their first and only loss of the season knocked them out of their campaign. And as for the SG Ball, you mentioned it before, they've had periods of great tenacity, resilience during the season, but they were just blown off the park by the Bulldogs. And to be fair, they weren't ever in the contest. Far too many errors, and we've seen errors from them during the season, but the Bulldogs made them pay big time for poor set completions and penalties and things like that. So disappointing way for them to end the season. But and of course that means no Eels team even in the grand final qualifiers this week. Clint, anything you wanted to add about the junior rep teams?
Well, just, there was understandably a lot of disappointment in that Howard Matt's room. For the reasons that you cited there, 60s, it being their first loss of the season, of course. But, they had aspirations, and I think we probably, in following them, had aspirations for them to go a little bit further. So they, in particular, very much feeling, I guess, the weight of potentially an opportunity loss. But, sometimes footy just goes that way, and the Warriors had a red hot start, and the boys just couldn't recover. So, there's there'll be a couple of those boys who'll be walking around this week a little disappointed that they're not playing this weekend in a grand final qualifier, because it was there for them to take.
I wonder whether in their mind they were ahead of themselves a little bit, because it was a long way from their best football. I mean, John asked the question whether they were prepared to play this week. I think, probably that long lead in isn't necessarily helpful, but all teams had to go
it isn't
through
in this
that.
grade. Not at this age, it's not. It's super beneficial for NRL teams and players who've had 6.5 months of footy behind them and need to ice up and treat some nigglies and bumps and bruises. But at this age, it interrupts the flow of your season, and unfortunately, that's what transpired for our Matt.
And I'm going to take the opposite tact when it comes to the Warriors, because I think a longer lead in probably helped them, because they're flying into Australia every week. This was probably the best period of preparation that they would have had for any game. They got more training sessions in, were able to, I guess, have a little bit more sleep between their trips, that they got, a little bit less. I know that they've they're probably used to all that travel by the end of the season, but I guess it gave them a chance to really have a longer period of time to focus in on exactly what they wanted to do for this week. And I think given the extra demands that were placed on them during the season, the travel, playing on Sundays every week and then having to fly home Sunday night, it would have been a big ask as far as the season's concerned. I reckon it was probably ideal for them to get that longer lead in, which is, as you suggested, the opposite of what the Eels would have ideally liked. And I guess then again, what we're suggesting is if the Eels had to finish first or second, they would have had a 3-week lead in, because the teams that finished first and second wouldn't have played for 3 weeks by the time they get their match this weekend. So it'll be interesting to see how those teams that played this week, just gone, perform next week. So anyway, we've pretty much exhausted the Eels news, fellas. So anyone that's listening, this is your time to go and grab a beverage of some description, or maybe to take a little bit of a break in some way from the podcast. We're at that halfway point. Some people like to break up the podcast into 2 listening stints. Whatever is your go with the podcast, go and do it right now, and then come back and listen to 40's musical interlude for the week.
Well, Blaize Talagi back in the team, which means the musical puns are back on the table. And on top of that, we're going to the tropics of Darwin, which made it a no-brainer. Whether you want to go for the interchange Inferno or the Darwin Inferno, we go to the break with this one.
Oh, burn that mother down, y'all.
Burn that mother down, yep.
Okay, mate. Well, that's a great interlude for this week, and might be a bit of a flashback to any of those older listeners that used to like to get out on the disco dance floor and shake the veritable booty. But for those of us...
Dan, my hips were moving along as that was playing.
What you'll have to do then, mate, is we'll put in a request to the club to reinstall Dance Cam, and I expect that when that DJ, what is it, DJ K time at the stadium, when he starts launching into some disco numbers, and we'll put in another request as well to have a 70s dance list, that you get up there, make sure you're on the big screen, and show everyone how it's done, mate. I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, God.
I'm disinclined to acquiesce to your request.
Now, if it was me, I'd be showcasing the old man dance, which I think I've got down pat. It's just for anyone that's unaware of it, and maybe to be unfair to show my dance stylings, but if you've ever been to an engagement party or a wedding and someone over the age of 60, and hang on, I've got to throw myself into that category, but generally you get the grandfather or maybe even the father or great-grandfather, who knows, but you get that older bloke getting up dancing, and generally what you see is this, the little 2-step happening with the feet. The arms come out like wings and flap, and there's generally a big smile on the face while it's happening. So I want you to picture this. Side step shuffle, wings flapping, smile on the face. There it is, the old man dance. I know you are envisioning yourselves, fellas, in your older age, mastering that step. And if you're kind to me this year, I'll demonstrate for you how it's done. Not for public display, but just for you fellas, just so you know what you need to do to get it down. Or if you really want to see an expert do it, go to the Australian crawl clip for, I think it's Downhearted, and you'll see a bloke in that clip dancing, or the David Bowie song. And what is it? It's the one that was set in Australia. It's Let's Dance. And it's when he's in the Outback pub and it goes to a patron in the pub dancing. And there it is, the old man dance. So you'll actually see it, some classic music clips. And as I said, if you go to an engagement party or a wedding or something like that where everyone's up dancing, check out some of the older people dancing. You get it down pat. So anyway, fellas, we move on. John, take us around the grounds with last week's results in the NRL.
It was a pretty tough and torrid week in the NRL, actually. A lot of close results across the board. 14 points was the biggest margin between any given team, and I think that was only one game. Two other teams had their results decided by 12 in the Sharks and the Dragons over the Rabbitohs and the Tigers, respectively. Go back to Thursday night, though. The Roosters prevailed over the Knights 22-20 in a real shootout there at McDonald Jones Stadium. Dogs barely pipped by the Storm. Amy Park 16-14 in favour of Melbourne there. Broncos 28-14 over the Dolphins. Warriors and Seagulls played out an insane draw. Manly up by 8 points with a minute on the clock and somehow managed to spin that into a draw and nearly a loss. So crazy stuff. Obviously our Eels upset the Cowboys 27-20. Sharks 34 over the Rabbitohs 22. Dragons 24 over the West Tigers 12. And then another crazy game. The Canberra Raiders, it was a game of the two biggest faders in the competition in Canberra and the Titans, and when the Raiders shot out to a good lead, it was going to be a question of who has a better second half, and it was the Titans. They took this game to Golden Point and should have won the game when an offside Chevy Stewart charged down Kieran Foran. Instead, they lose 21-20 with the Raiders banking an important win there to keep them up the top of the ladder. But yeah, all in all, a pretty crazy round of NRL. I know that you got some stuff on the run sheet in terms of the coaches, 60s, and we're going to get to that shortly. But I don't know what stood out to you guys, given the relative parity of these games.
Well, Clint, for mine, there were two that stood out. One was that finish in the Warriors and Seagulls game. And the other, of course, was the match between the Titans and the Raiders. Oh, look, watching that Titans and Raiders game unfold, it was, to me, I thought that the Titans were horribly unlucky towards the end. I thought that the way they finished, they deserved to have their first win. And it just seemed like destiny that when they weren't able to take that chance towards the end of extra time, that it felt like fate that somehow the Raiders would squeak home with that field goal win. And I guess the Raiders' young star was able to, Ethan Strange, the way he was able to evade the defence and get downfield, as soon as he made that run, it was like,
it's all over.
We knew it was going to unfold. Yeah. So what about you? What was your games to note, the games to watch from that weekend?
Oh, look, I think what it sounds like the rest of us were all doing here was we and call it a little bit of bitterness from the week before, but it would have been nice to see the Raiders lose that one and drop that one. And it certainly would have continued a trend and something that I've just articulated to both of you gentlemen, in that teams always struggle the week after playing the Eels. Either a large percentage of them lose, and or equally so, they put in a poor winning performance. And that was certainly the case with the Raiders and the way that they faded in that second half. But it just felt like after Brian Kelly nailed that sideline conversion with his second ever attempt at goal in first grade, that it was maybe going to unfold for the Titans, but it wasn't meant to be. But the other game of note is for me actually interesting. There was the Thursday night game between the Roosters and the Knights, and because the Knights went into that game very weirdly, from my perspective, as heavy favourites. I know the Roosters had a few outs, but that was like classic narrative for the upset. Everything that was building into that game, and between the betting markets and what people were saying online, I found myself isolated and going, like, am I the only one thinking that the Roosters have this in the bag? it just felt like a typical occasion for them. And, they obviously got a lot of attention throughout the media throughout the week. I just had the feeling that they were going to come out and make themselves known, particularly after the manner in which they lost to the Bulldogs the week before.
Yeah, it was an interesting game as well. And I don't know whether it necessarily speaks to the Knights being not quite what they were last year, or maybe that last year was a season where it fell for them quite favourably in the latter part of the season. But just on that Titans and Raiders game, what about the theatre of Ricky Stewart having a crack at Des Hasler? I mean, we know that Ricky Stewart is a coach.
An enigma.
Yeah, I mean, look, he loves to go to town when he feels that his side's been dudded by the referee. And when another coach dares to say it, he goes on the attack against that coach. It's quite remarkable. I mean, I think there's ways of responding, but that without getting stuck into the other coach. And I believe that he was made aware of what Hasler was going to say by Hasler himself. And I'm in no way defending Des Hasler, because in the other respect, I actually agree with what Ricky Stewart said about the spoiling tactics that were being employed out there, and the fact that they were allowed to continue. It sort of reminded me of round one last year against the Melbourne Storm, when Ashley Klein allowed the Storm to wrestle when there would been a clear directive from the NRL during the pre-season that the ruck control was going to be tight, and there'd be strict calls by the referees and instructions, and that there'd be the set restart or the penalty blown very quickly if players didn't respond to the referees' calls to move out of the tackle. So it reminded me of that, and also the way that Melbourne had mastered the stand-up wrestle, where they put hands all over the football. They don't put the player to the ground, and they get that longer holding of the player for their defence to get settled, actually in a standing position and not flat on their back on the ground. It's a wonderful alternative that certain coaches have come up with, just to keep the tackle player standing, hands all over the football as you're standing and wrestling, so it looks as if they're still battling the tackle, but they're actually not. The defenders are in complete control of the ball runner. So it reminded me, the Titans tactics reminded me a lot of that. So I agreed with Stewart's sentiment, but not with him then launching an attack. I mean, I think it was close to a personal attack, wasn't it, to suggest the coach was on another planet with his observations, and then to call his team and the tactics cheating.
I mean, that's you cannot question the integrity of referees, so you're allowed to question the integrity of rival coaches?
Well, I mean, that's the path that he's chosen to take. And interestingly, he's there praising the referee for the lopsided counts in penalties and six agains. And look, it's for my way of thinking, no, it's not a straightforward case of penalties and that being lopsided. I mean, you do look in the mirror, first of all, when you have decisions go against you. But as we know, there's penalties and six again calls that differ greatly. And there's also the times when those penalties and six agains aren't called, and it's, it just becomes this bigger debate. I guess the NRL have decided that the officiating wasn't good enough because Casey Badger has been demoted from the NRL this week, and I don't think it would be about the one decision where Chevy Stewart was offside in that final play. I think one-off things like that in that time of the game I don't know that the NRL have ever come down heavily on a referee for making one mistake like that. So they must have obviously agreed that it wasn't good from her, despite what Ricky Stewart said. So, yeah, I mean, Clint, Ricky Stewart, he's the gift that keeps on giving, isn't he?
Well, he's certainly entertaining for neutrals. He's one of the great characters of the game, and there's there's never short of that I should say that entertainment is never far away from him, rightly or wrongly.
Yeah, but we move on now, fellas, and John, the injury lists across the NRL and specific clubs like this week's opponent, and you touched on it with the Dolphins. Those injuries, they just keep growing, and the Hammer is one of the big names to be out of action this week. How deep is this injury list going?
It feels like one of the worst starts to a season in general, doesn't it? We've had a number of high-profile halfbacks. Obviously, our own Mitchell Moses. Nathan Cleary had a hammy who's now had a setback, so he's behind schedule for his return. A lot of guys nicked up, some serious injuries. I don't know if it's got something to do with the hip drop, crisis that's around the game, or if it's just a case of bad luck. Someone with better access to the relevant data there would have to make an informed post in that regard. But yeah, it is brutal right now. And like you mentioned, Sixties, the Dolphins are copying it real bad. Parramatta have been missing a number of key players, fronted by Mitchell Moses, but Bryce Cartwright with that rib injury that he's now fighting through on the field. It does feel like the teams that can get back to healthiest the fastest have a chance to really separate themselves from the pack in the coming weeks and months. So hopefully that's the Parramatta Eels, but it is brutal around the game right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Clint, can you remember seeing the start of a season like this in terms of not just the number of injuries, but the key injuries?
Yeah, anecdotally, no. It kind of feels like every week we're getting a big name on the sideline for, and I'll classify an extended period here of 4 or more games. Which it's the NRL. It's so hard to win a game, and we're in a position right now where, by virtue of the Dolphins coming in last year, there's been at least a temporary dilution of the talent pool by virtue of there being another team. That one, what used to be one injury could be managed, or 1 or 2 key injuries could still be managed. Now they can have a cascading effect, a cascading negative effect, that is, on the outcome of the affected team over a course of the games that player or those players are unavailable. It's very intriguing, and obviously the team that's least affected, or the teams that are least affected, are going to come through these periods on top, or I guess the weighting of their win-loss ratio be less affected. But yeah, everyone's sort of getting their turn in the kaleidoscope at the moment. We copped ours pretty heavily, obviously, with the Mitch Moses injury, and given the expected duration of time that we're without him. But yeah, it just feels like each week it's a case of, well, who's next? And you don't want to be thinking that way, but that's certainly how it's been unfolding.
And even beyond the official injuries, I think it was AJ Brimson boys that was on. I think it might have been Matty Johns on his show, and he was talking about how so many of the squad that are playing are just carrying significant injuries, but just playing through it. And that's a reality that faces every club. Is that stuff that would sideline me, you, and the average Joe, and have us limping around and cussing. These guys have to play through and push through. So I don't think the Eels are any exception there. I think you can see some of our guys are walking wounded and they're pushing through for the sake of the team.
They've got their ribs padded.
Mm-hmm. And and it goes beyond that with other guys too. But yeah, this does feel like a survival of the fittest, a real war of attrition right now in this competition.
And you know what? Having seen, I guess, the last 10, 11 pre-seasons in a row, you'd see players who get nicked up a little bit during pre-season and they'd maybe be doing rehab for 2, 3, 4 weeks. They wouldn't be joining in with any opposed or contact sessions with the rest of the players. Something similar that a player might have at this time of year with all clubs, they're playing through it. They're having to play through it, because whereas in a pre-season, a club can afford to have 6 or 8 players sitting out sessions and be running around in a rehab group, especially if you've got somewhere between 36 and 40 players doing the pre-season, you can afford for players to be out. And why risk someone when they're not playing? You just get it right during the pre-season, because the aim of the pre-season is to be starting the season proper with every player available and every player fighting fit. So why bust them up by forcing them to do full training when they're carrying injuries? But there's no such luxury during the season itself. Another interesting story this week was that over at South Sydney, the club that seems to be featuring so much in news these days and taking some of that media shine away from the Tigers, but South Sydney, last week, it was a fait accompli that this was Demetriou's last week in charge of the Rabbitohs. Well, last week, that last match was his last one in charge. And now this week, the story's been spun into it being he's been given a reprieve. Well, we were all, the narrative is, oh, well, yes, it was 100% going to happen, but somehow it's not going to happen. And then Mal Meninga's been spooked by this, or he's not happy with that. And the powers that be were satisfied with the game effort that South put in against the Sharks and blah, 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 blah. When I have to wonder what they really knew about the situation at South, because it just seems to be, I don't believe that it goes from this bloke is 100% being sacked to, no, we're not sacking him. And of course, then the narrative changes to what a mistake it is to not sack him. And it just goes on and on and on. I guess when you're in the eyes of the media, Clint, there's no escaping, because they will spin something one way or another.
Yeah, and it's why the media training for anyone who holds an official position is paramount to the success of that position. It's simply not a job of getting out on the training paddock with the players and working with the sports scientists. You have a very customer facing role, and by customer I mean you're facing the club stakeholders and then likewise the rugby league public, who all have an interest in either your success or dare I say failure. And you're going to be judged obviously on the results, but also the manner in which you handle all of those situations. And we live in the 24/7 news cycle we have for the better part of the last 40, 50 years on Earth in the Western world. And rugby league and its evolution throughout the 90s and 2000s into that of professional sport, and dare I say the premier professional sport in this country now, certainly in terms of viewership, the media is always going to be looking to optimize its content cycle. And when you I guess douse the flames with petrol, and through not only struggling on-field performances, but likewise the I guess the things that have taken place at South in the off the field the better part of the last 4 to 6 weeks, you kind of end up where they are. So even though Jason Demetriou's got a reprieve now, you do wonder if it's moving deck chairs on the Titanic sort of situation. And the only thing that's going to turn that around is quite coincidentally what our head coach Brad Arthur said during his presser in the lead up to the Cowboys game, and that's getting wins. So You know, you quieten the noise by getting wins, and that's got to be their core focus. But you know, it's currently not working there at South Sydney. The only win that they had, they were pretty fortuitous to get past the Bulldogs. Had the Bulldogs in the game that South Sydney did win had a little bit more criticalness about their attack, they probably would have finished them off as well. So they certainly had the opportunity. So it hasn't been going well there for South, but they've got the bye this week, a chance to reset, and it'd be interesting to see not only the type of team that comes out after the bye, but likewise the lineup of that team once Latrell Mitchell returns from suspension, because of the speculation of him returning back to centre.
Yeah, John, what do you think the likelihood is of Demetriou surviving the season, or is it even possible to make a prediction on that? And secondly, the Rabbitohs getting a win anytime soon?
Dead man walking. I don't think there's anything else but bad news coming for Demetriou. You don't reach the flashpoint you do with your club in the media the way it has for South without, they've been getting to full support of the board territory. I would be stunned if he's there in a month, let alone the end of a season. If anything, it feels like South have backed away from the obvious coach shirts just purely on an optics basis. And I know, like you said, Quint, the media are definitely culpable on this too. Like they absolutely are farming this for clicks and reads and whatever other impression you can get on social media these days. In terms of where the Rabbitohs go from here, I don't know. A lot of people are saying that Wayne Bennett, is the de facto replacement, but I don't think so. Like, I can see Wayne being courted by other clubs. Other clubs aren't even established in the NRL yet to spearhead their campaigns. So it leaves South Sydney in a precarious position, especially because they've got such a mercurial locker room. There's a lot of big egos there, a lot of people that need to be managed with kiddie gloves, it feels like right now, and that's never conducive to long-term success. They have to find a coach that can do that, and that's why Wayne Bennett's being considered the likely replacement. In terms of where they win, I mean, you look at their schedule, and obviously Melbourne and the Panthers are always going to be tough games, but suddenly the Dragons game is not a gimme. Flanagan's got them playing pretty tough football. Zach Lomax, we've talked about him. He's been playing great football for him. Cowboys back to Parramatta. Like, I don't know. Like, I mean, they could easily beat us. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying the Eels are going to crush them, but there is no gimmies in that run of games there. So if things don't change, they're going to be in a huge hole, and it's going to be at least they've got a win banked. Obviously, the Gold Coast Titans don't have one, but they're dealing with a first-year coach who's got runs on the board from his NRL career. So I don't know. The Bunnies are in a huge hole right now, and they call it a reprieve, but if anything, it's a stay of execution by a week or whatever the end-up timeline is for Demetriou.
Yeah, I'll probably give it 2 weeks, because I think when I say 2 weeks, I mean 2 matches.
Yeah.
Because I think they may be heading towards a couple of heavy losses. There was a lot of talk about the effort that was in their performance against the Sharks. I thought the Sharks were ordinary myself.
Yep.
And I think the South Sydney performance, there was effort and minimal polish. And I think an on-song team that, like a Penrith Panthers, like a clinical on-song team like the Panthers, would have put a cricket score on the Rabbitohs. And we're not saying that with any thought about our Eels are so much better, because we worry about what our struggles might be against certain opponents when we haven't got a full roster on the field. But it just feels like South, there's a lot of players that aren't on the same page, and whether that's the fault of the coach and how he runs things, or whether it's just a case of the roster isn't good enough, or they've got players that just aren't capable of working effectively in the culture of South? I don't know. They're the only ones that can answer that, and I think it's unfair to maybe point too many fingers. So that's for them to work out. But I want to move on to a really bizarre piece of news, because I can't ever recall anything like this, where there was, maybe I can, because I think there's been some sponsor associations, I think from memory, with the Sharks, with a certain sponsor that might have been, had adult entertainment background, I think, from memory. But the Dolphins have a sponsor by the name of Alternaleaf, and they are a plant-based medicines clinic or plant-based treatment clinic. So it's alternative medical therapies. And it just so happens that one of the ways that they are able to help people is through medical marijuana. And there's issues around sponsorship and whether it's allowed, and I believe it's being investigated, but whether it's allowed for broadcasters to have coverage that shows, first of all, the jersey with the Alternaleaf logo on it, or ground signage of Alternaleaf, actually, even for whether the grounds themselves, the stadium themselves, can put up that sort of advertising. And it's an interesting one, because I believe the view of the defence of this sponsorship is that the legislation or the rules that operate that say that you can't have advertising of any sort for prescription medication, and medical marijuana is prescription medication, that you can't have advertising for it through on television or on sports coverage. Whereas they're saying that Alternaleaf is promoting the clinic and not a specific medication. John, have you got your two bobs worth that you want to throw in there?
I don't have any strong opinions on this one way or the other, but it's always funny seeing a battle of technicalities. The media and marketing space is filled with them. So I'm interested to see how this plays out, because I imagine it opens the door for other companies to potentially sponsor any given team in the NRL. So in a way, it's going to be a landmark precedent one way or the other. But yeah, don't have a dog in this fight. So yeah, I just wait and see how it plays out.
Clint?
My only question with it is, if within the NRL rules that it's abiding to the rules, okay, well, tick, okay, we move on from that. But, it's more about the sub-communication and the wider societal communication out to the young followers out there. And, are we sub-communicating by virtue of allowing this, that a lifestyle? And I know that I'm drawing a long bow here, but, in essence, I'll cut it short and I won't go into the long-winded explanation. I'm doing the Helen Lovejoy, won't somebody please think of the children? My question is only in that space. So, like John, I don't have a dog in this fight, but at the same time, I think there's fair questions to ask of this, and whether that passes the sniff test. Not for me to decide. If it were up to me personally, I probably wouldn't allow it. Just because those connections can be made, and it then becomes a potential case of whataboutism, and are you also potentially opening Pandora's box as a result of that?
I remember there was a case. I've got to think it was in the early to mid 80s, when the medical entrepreneur Jeffrey Edelstein was looking at buying the Sharks, and I think he'd pretty much
Mm.
had wrapped up the purchase, and he was buying it for his then wife, and I'm trying to remember what her name was, but she was a lot younger than him, and I believe she was a Sharks supporter. And it was, geez, I think he was announcing it like as a birthday present or something like that back in the day. And there were Sharks players there, and so it was obviously something that was going to go ahead, and it didn't go ahead. But you know, that was obviously his clinics, I guess, would have been the sponsors of that. And I can't even remember whether they had a particular name that wasn't his name, but that's the closest I can think to that. Fellas, let's now wrap things up by looking at the launch of State of Origin for 2024, and we've had comments from the Blues coach Michael Maguire about what his attitude is going to be around form and around having players that are going to be the Origin type players, that competitive, tough Origin type players. And like, for example, there's a name that's been thrown up in Cam McInnes. We always get, when it comes to this competitiveness, we always get Jake Trebojevich's name mentioned as a must select for State of Origin. I'm interested in hearing your takes, fellas, because my attitude towards this is I find it interesting that there are players like Jake Turbo and now it seems like Cam McInnes who a coach would like for their competitiveness, but I don't see them. If they were on the open market, I'm sure they'd get some suitors, but I don't know that they would necessarily command the salaries that either, in Jake's case, that Manly are paying him. And I don't know what Cam McInnes is on, but I don't know that they're high market value players, but it seems that they are Origin players, and that almost feels like an anomaly. But I guess it's like the coach getting the sort of players that he wants just to get the job done, and he doesn't necessarily want the players that are the highest profile or the most talented in a particular position. John, what's your take?
Yeah, look, you love a competitive guy, like the one that's got that dog in him at the club level. They're the guys that are your glue, on a week-to-week basis. Their ability to dig in and sort of rally the troops is important. At Origin level, obviously, you prize competitiveness and the ability to fight and get into the trenches. But you got to pick the 17 most talented guys and back yourself as a coach to get them into a headspace to win. Jake is obviously beloved by the New South Wales hierarchy. We've spoken about before, 60s and 20. He is obviously an incredible individual off the field. Like, you don't hear a single bad word about Jake. But the reality is that he's not going to win you an Origin game. And the Blues keep picking him, and I don't think it's a shock that the Blues, across various coaches and various iterations, have this problem. And it's why Queensland keep winning, because Queensland consistently, they've had the luxury to pick obviously great players in key positions for a long time, but when they go for a guy out of the blue, they're not picking a guy that's a meme. That's the wrong way of putting it, because that's unfair. But picking a guy that's plucky and competitive, they're picking a young guy that's on the up and maybe give him a taste of Origin football before everyone else expected him to be ready. And that's why we saw with Gilbert at the Dolphins. I know he's injured now, but that's just bad luck. But he was ready to take off and explode. And the Blues go the opposite way. They go to older guys who are competitive and think that they're going to make a difference.
You know what? I think Queensland, going back 20 to 30 years, would go down that path of picking players who I mean, they literally would pick players out of reserve grade who weren't in form for their club. We had Bob Lindner
Yeah,
for a
famously.
short period at the Eels, and Bob Lindner was one of the great underperformers that that we'd ever recruited in terms of a star player who just didn't produce for the club. But I guarantee you one thing: like any time he was selected for Queensland, he was one of their stars. But
And
I guess that, I mean, maybe that, and I think there's been some other players that's happened with in the past with Queensland Origin, but I think the game's in a different place now.
that's exactly what I was
Certainly
going to
Queensland
60s.
is.
That was true for then.
Queensland have a different. Yeah, like you say, Queensland have that approach nowadays of selecting bright, up and coming superstars
Like
in their
the
sides.
Hammer, Murray
And
Talangi, Ruben Cotter, Tom Gilbert, Pat Carrigan. And look, all those guys are now established NRL stars, so it's easy to say, yeah, of course they're going to pick them. But when they picked them for State of Origin, they weren't the established NRL stars. They were guys that were either fighting for a spot in their team or were, NRL cemented, but nowhere near the upside that we now see that they have. And yet, when you think about what have the Blues done in recent seasons in that regard, like try and pick a Blue in the same capacity that has had the same impact as a young outside prospect. We don't do it. Like maybe Liam Martin, but he was coming. Liam Martin had established himself as a premiership force at Penrith. We default to safe picks so often, and we're not bold, we're not brash, we're not aggressive, and unfortunately, that's not going to win you State of Origin.
Yeah, and you would think that would be known by previous coaches, and yet I don't know. I just get that feeling that Maguire might be going down this path, although the media's talking him up as having a bold new approach to his selection in looking at players that might not have featured in conversations before. Well, the reason that, with respect, some of them aren't, is that they are simply doing a very good job at club level, but they're not what you would say are standout ones. Now, don't get me wrong. When I say they're doing a very good job at club level, their club probably wouldn't swap them for someone else. So that when we're talking about players like Cam McInnes or Jake Trbojevic, we're not putting them down in any way. And John, you said they're not going to win an Origin game for you. They're probably not going to lose one either.
True.
But if you're going into a game where, like, it's the ultimate in rugby league is State of Origin, and I just think if you're not going to select the best players in terms of the ones that are the genuine star material, and you're instead picking for your coaching philosophy, I'm not sure that it's pure representative football, because to me, representative football is where players have earned that selection by being at the absolute top of the tree in their position across the NRL. And I mean, I guess that's the argument that some people have used for selecting players from Pacifica nations, or even from the top tier countries in rugby league like New Zealand and England, and just say, look, if they're playing in the NRL, they're eligible for Origin football because we want the best of the best. And then in the next breath, they're talking about bringing in blokes who will do a job that the coach wants done. And to me, that's a conundrum. It's I don't know. Look, I don't want players that aren't eligible playing, and people keep bringing up Victor Radley's name in this. He chose to play for England, so he's not even in the conversation now. But Clint, is this too harsh, or I mean, are you on board with players that the coach wants that'll get the job done at Origin level, and that it's simply all about winning Origin rather than selecting the best, necessarily the best or most talented players?
I'm definitely in the latter camp, because the first option that you've positioned there has been tried and tested and doesn't work. Now, you can make an argument that Origin being a game of attrition, and the fact that the results have only just in any individual series just slightly swung Queensland's way, but it continuously just slightly swings that way, and you need a circuit breaker. And that might be one or two key selections, and you can make the rest of those other guys work. But I'm probably going to go a step too hard here. I know this is something I brought up in last year's Origin series, that at the start of the series, you had a different opinion of me on this one, 60s, but I wasn't all that keen on Isaiah Yeo being in the New South Wales squad. And that's not because he's not a great player. He's a phenomenal player. He's been one of the best club players for a number of years now. But in that Origin arena where you want middle forwards with leg speed that are going to go kamikaze for their stint, his workman-like and tradesman-like style of play probably isn't as well suited to the opponents he's coming up against. Likewise, the link man role he plays for those Penrith halves, and I understand that Brad Fittler wanted to have that Penrith connection throughout all the each of the 3/3 of the field, and the likes of Cleary running the show from that perspective. So, look, I'm a big fan of big and big, fast and hard running forwards being in the Origin arena. If it's up to me, your two starting props are and should have been for the last 2 or 3 seasons, Payne Haas and Regan Campbell-Gillard. I think that both those middle forwards are made for that arena. You could then maybe get away with having someone like a Yeo or a Trbojevic around that, but because they haven't selected those guys together, it's kind of like you're carrying more of the latter rather than the former. And so it's a real balancing act, right? And you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. But, if Michael Maguire intends to select the same guys that Brad Fittler selected, then why did we move Brad Fittler on?
Yeah, it'll be interesting when the team lists come out. I think you're getting very controversial there, Clint, with the Isaiah Yeo, but that might just be my personal bias because fan of his
I was proven right in last year's series with that.
Yeah. So we beg to differ on that particular player, but what you're saying as well is I agree with, which is if we end up selecting a very similar team, you then wonder why the overhaul, because Fittler, although Maguire and Fittler will probably prove to be very different in the way that they prepare the team or approach the game, you're still talking about the players out there that need to get the job done. And if we end up with it being 70-80% of the same team out there, and that the minor changes are to bring in a couple of players who are maybe older players who just do a good job at club level but aren't necessarily on the radar, I just wonder, whether that's the right approach or not against what will be a youthful and star-studded Queensland team. Anyway, fellas, I think that just about wraps up where we are at in terms of our news episode. You've both done a fine job, I must say. Absolutely outstanding this week. And thank you to everyone for listening. Of course, thank you to our sponsor, Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta. Greg and the team have been with us almost since day dot, and we truly appreciate that support over many, many years. Also, a shout out to Paraleagues for their support of our coverage of Junior Rugby League throughout the 2024 season, which is, in terms of the junior reps, is now wrapped up. But of course, you will find us at Parramatta Leagues Club either before or after every home game this season. And a reminder as well that we will be there on Friday night when the Eels take on the Dolphins in Darwin. So if you're looking to hang out with some fellow Eels supporters as you watch the game. So we end up with a bit of an atmosphere with the game on the big screen at Para Leagues. You can head down there, catch us for a bit of a pre-game chat, a bit of halftime talk about what's happened, and then the instant reaction podcast straight after. We look forward to seeing you then. And as I always say, go you mighty Eels.